Words cannot fully express our sorrow for how much these children suffered. They are precious children of God who should always expect our protection, our care, and our love. Their innocence was violated by those whom they trusted. In some cases, the trust was betrayed by members of their own family. In other cases, by people who carry a sacred responsibility for the care of soul. In all circumstances, the betrayal is a terrible violation of human dignity.
I'm Dr. Saldana. I'm a gynecologist for the last 22 years. I have been working in the area of child sexual abuse and sexuality education for the last 15 years. I have been trained as a child protection specialist, which means I work with doctors, government institutions, police, judiciary, and NGOs who work with children who have faced sexual abuse. Primarily, what is child sexual abuse? It is the use or involvement of a child in any way for the sexual gratification of the older person or adult. Now, it can be contact or non-contact. For example, forcing a child to have sex with an adult or in any way involved in a sexual game, touching a child. It can also be non-contact, as in showing a child pornography, talking to a child with sexual overtones or sexual innuendos, or making sexual comments to children. It's almost even as simple as watching children in a swimming pool or watching them undress or bathe with the intention of sexual gratification in the mind. All these are sexual abuse. If you look at the fact that there are long-term and short-term effects on the child, the biggest issue with child sexual abuse is that children are unable to speak about it, and that comes from our society's silence around sexuality. When we don't talk about sexuality as a comfortable, normal process, it creates problems, that is, the child can't speak about it. For example, if a child, 4-year-old child or 10-year-old child is running around in the playground and somebody comes and pinches him or pulls his hair or tries to push her or throw sand in her face, she immediately comes running and says, "Mommy, Daddy, teacher," she'll call help, saying this person's troubling me. But in the same way, if an older person comes and touches the private parts of the child keeps quiet. And already by the age of 4 or 5 or 6, our society has stopped children from being able to speak about parts of their body which are natural and healthy. So then what happens to the child is the child has become silent about it, doesn't want to speak about it, but is troubled by it. Sometimes it may be a one-off incident, sometimes it is a repeated influence. And very often that happens from people who are close to the child. In our country, we are so careful about children when we are out in the open, going to a bus station, by train, traveling, going to a market. We hold our children tightly by their hands. We don't let them go even into a public bathroom alone. On the other hand, we leave our children in our neighbor's house, friend's house. They go to school, they travel by van, they travel in autos. And we don't realize that the person who is most likely to abuse a child is a person who has power, authority over the child, given by the parents. And the child feels, how can I speak about this person? When a child comes home from school and says, today my teacher punished me. And we all go, what did you do? So invariably the child feels that if there is an adult-child conflict, people will believe the adult, not the child. And this further silences them and prevents them from speaking out. Now, who are the perpetrators? It could be anybody. It could be a parent, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, relatives, people who work in your home. It could be security men. It could be auto drivers, van drivers, teachers, principals. It could be just about anybody, and so it's almost impossible to protect a child from child sexual abuse, but what we can do is help the child report it as soon as the child feels uncomfortable about something. If you look at the effects of child sexual abuse on children, because of this inability to speak about it, the child feels helpless and powerless. When that happens, the child withdraws into herself or himself, becomes quiet, doesn't take part in activities, starts moving away from functions. Sometimes the child shows the opposite feeling. They get aggressive, they get angry, they throw things. They suddenly have these tantrums which parents say, this is bad behavior. but the child is trying to give a message. When a child throws tantrums or withdraws, there is something the child is trying to tell us, and we need to listen. We can't just say, don't behave like this, it's not okay. Sometimes the children say, I don't like so and so, and we immediately say, how can you talk like that? He's such an important person, or he's such a loving, caring person, he's such a wonderful person. You can't speak like that about somebody. And we don't allow the child to speak further. When a child has been abused, the biggest issue is of feeling powerless. And one of the other issues is that the child has been introduced to sexuality for which they're not emotionally or physically ready. And this is what is known as a stigmatization which arises, where the child feels something dirty has happened to me. Now, if you look at the long-term effects of this, what ends up is that the child doesn't trust people because there has been a breakdown of trust. There has been a betrayal by somebody whom the child thought was trustworthy. And this lands up in a lot of relationships further on, where the child, as they grow up, will have difficulty in maintaining boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, in marriage, even trusting their own children because of fear. The other thing is they find it difficult to be comfortable. They feel very uncomfortable about their body image. They often cover themselves up, or sometimes they wear extremely provocative clothing, and it's almost like saying, I don't give a damn about my body anymore because my body's been spoiled. And this is such a wrong notion from society, because what I would like to say is that when somebody abuses you, what's happening is that person has done something wrong. They have broken their responsibility towards you. They have broken trust. But you didn't get spoiled. You didn't get dirty. You just had an accident. And you can grow from that. You don't need to carry that ever, because it was not your fault and it was never your fault.
If child molesters depend our ignorance in order to hurt little ones, what steps can we take to eliminate the edge and make sure that they don't succeed? Learning how offenders think and act is the first step in making our society safer from those who pose a risk to our little ones. We will examine few common behavioral characteristics of child sexual offenders that we must understand if we are committed to eliminating their edge.
Hello, I'm Monica Ghosh, a psychologist. I've been having 33 years of experience in teaching, research, and I have authored 2 books. And I've been writing a lot on child sexual abuse for quite some time. I also work with NGOs who are involved in protecting the child from sexual abuse. It is of interest to know who an offender is. An offender could be an adult, could also be a juvenile who actually has been probably rejected by majority, and he shows his power on a victim, and this victim he chooses with a lot of care because he has been probably tracking, he probably has been watching, and then one day he chooses this person and tries to probably develop some closeness, develop a trust on the victim, and then he tries to show his power, and this is his own way of showing his power. He definitely suffers from personality disorder. To a great extent, he must be schizoid with multiple personality disorders. So I think, and it does not really show, it may be one among us. He does not really look somebody who's weird, which is a very wrong kind of a stereotype that we probably would be having on an offender. He may be a very normal looking person, and he could be also one among us. There are basically 5 characteristics you can find in a sexual offender. First, he's a habitual one. He is not the first time that he would have done. He has been doing it. He has been offending for quite some time. And he is most unsuspected. He could be one of the family, could be a neighbor, could be a teacher, anybody who we do not really generally suspect and who is in regular touch with the child. He is not a stranger most often. Not that the strangers do not, but most often the offender is not a stranger. And the last bit of it is very irking, is that he justifies his act. He does not really think it's a criminal offense. He thinks he is in a relationship. And these are the characteristics which needs to be really watched. Child sexual abuse is not new. It has been happening for quite some time. Many of it actually go unreported, so we really do not have the actual numbers in any country. and worldwide, it's Africa where the maximum amount of sexual abuse takes place. The more heartening is that it gets reported today. People do not feel ashamed to come out and then complain about it. And I think that is something which really probably is going to go a long way in making a prevention on this, because victims are being recognized, being arrested, parents are coming forward to complain, the police is taking a lot of action, there are a lot of NGOs who are working towards the prevention. It is needless to say that it has a huge impact on the child, and it's a very long lasting one. It's a core psychological injury that the child suffers. We can probably categorize into 4 different categories. The child is traumatized, and sexualization, betrayal, stigmatization takes place, and the child also experiences powerlessness. So these actually have a long-term impact on the child's psychological development, emotional development, and also social development. The impact of sexual abuse on a child need not necessarily be the same for every child. It could differ from child to child. It could depend on what has been the patterns of adjustment that the child has shown earlier, because the child also faces different kinds of traumas in life. It could be a sibling rivalry, it could be a punishment, it could be any kind of other small little traumas. So the pattern of adjustment that the child has shown before could also determine as to how the child will adjust or cope up with this kind of a sexual abuse. It also depends on how the people around, that is the family, especially the mother, responds to a trauma like this, because the child often mimics the response of the adult.
India is home to the largest child population in the world, with almost 42% of the total population under 18 years of age. Needless to say, the health and security of the country's children is integral to any vision of its progress and development. One of the issues marring this vision for the country's future generations is the evil of child sexual abuse. Statistics released by the National Crime Records Bureau reveal that there has been a steady increase in sexual crimes against children. According to a study conducted by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in 2007, over half of the children surveyed reported having faced some form of sexual abuse. While rape is considered a serious offence under the Indian Penal Code, the law was deficient in recognizing and punishing other sexual offences, such as sexual harassment, stalking, and child pornography, for which prosecutors had to rely on imprecise provisions such as outraging the modesty of a woman. The Ministry of Women and Child Development, recognizing that the problem of child sexual abuse needs to be addressed through less ambiguous and more stringent legal provisions, championed the introduction of a specific law to address this offence. The POCSO Act was therefore formulated in order to effectively address the heinous crimes of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children. This new act provides for a variety of offences under which an accused can be punished. It recognizes forms of penetration under the penile-vaginal penetration and criminalizes acts of immodesty against children too. With respect to pornography, the Act criminalizes even watching or collecting of pornographic content involving children. The Act makes abetment of child sexual abuse an offence. It also provides for various procedural reforms, making the tiring process of trial in India considerably easier for children.
They do not have the responsibility of expressing their sexuality in a way which is not harmful or damaging for somebody else, particularly a smaller child or a younger person. They use power, they use authority, they use threats, they use bribery and cajoling, and they sometimes use the confusion and ignorance of the child against the child. In other ways, how can we prevent it? One of the ways is, first of all, reducing the chances of children getting in contact with an abuser. That means when you have recruitment policies in schools, in institutions which work with children, institutions where children are traveling alone with an adult, there are very clear guidelines that you do not touch a child in a way which is inappropriate. If a teacher or a person is trying to talk to a child alone in a room, the door should have a glass window, otherwise the door should be open, and they should never be alone with a child. Other things are like at our homes, there can be anybody who could do anything. It's not possible to keep a 24/7 observation on a child. So we teach the child how to report abuse. Starting from the age of 3 and 4, we can start talking to a child about safe and unsafe touch. And this comes not just in terms of personal safety or sexuality, as in don't touch these parts of my body. It comes from when the child says, I don't like to drink milk, it makes my stomach hurt. And the parent said, no, drink it. You've damaged the child's ability to say no. The child says, I don't want to wear this dress, mama. No, you have to wear it. But it's pokey. No, it's not. Again, you're telling the child what the child feels about himself or herself is wrong. When we give these messages to children, finally when the child is being touched inappropriately by an adult, the child thinks, when I told mama or papa about something, they always said, no, you don't know, we know. So maybe this is also something which I don't know and the adult knows. So personal safety classes for children starts with the ability of a child to say no, starting from the parents, from teachers, from the most important responsible adults. Because even if it's irritating sometimes for a child to say no and you have to listen to the child, I'm sorry, but that's the best way to keep the child safe. Thank you.
Sexual abuse can happen to children of any race, socio-economic group, religion or culture. There is no foolproof way to protect children from sexual abuse, but there are steps you can take to reduce this risk. If something happens to your child, remember that the perpetrator is to blame, not you, and especially not the child.